My name is Muller-Paisner. I'm a psychoanalyst who specializes in working with beings who have been traumatized. The last video that you saw was a video of Lucy and Niki. It was a woman and her dog who had been through a car accident together. It was called A Healing Journey, and it was done for the Kerulos website. There I was the interviewer, and here I'm going to be the interviewee.
And what is this video about?
I wanted to talk more about the effects of various types of trauma. In the last video, it was a wonderful, Lucy and Niki were a wonderful example of a sharp and clear one trauma segment, where we know that the dog was 1.5 years old and had Lucy, the owner, talked about how she was a very happy dog and very relaxed. And after the car accident, both she and her owner couldn't get a sense of themselves. They both were acting as if they were waiting for the other shoe to drop. And when I asked Lucy about the symptoms before working with Niki, what the symptoms were, she actually, without knowing anything about post-traumatic stress disorder, she actually talked about several of the symptoms which were post-traumatic stress. One of them was that the dog would startle in her own home. Whenever someone was walking down the stairs and she was below, she would hear the noise and she would startle, or she even startled when one of her toys fell. So she had an exaggerated sense that way, and she was acting as if it was going to happen again. In the car, she was very rigid, very stiff. She was looking out the window, and she wasn't lying down the way that she used to lie down, so that her life had changed, even though the trauma was only 30 seconds long.
Do all traumas cause post-traumatic stress?
No, actually they don't. Post-traumatic stress can be caused in 30 seconds, or it can be over a period of time. It depends on a person or a being's prior existence and what kind of life they've had. 3 men in a foxhole being bombed, all of them surviving, one or all of them or none of them can have post-traumatic stress disorder. It's a particular symptom, and it's in response to having a sense that life is going to end. Either you're going to die, or someone you love is going to die, or you're witnessing something that's horrific, and there's nothing that you can do about it. The helplessness is very important as a symptom.
And is Blue has Blue suffered from post-traumatic stress?
Yes, actually he has. What's interesting is many of us, when we're guardians to animals, we're told we don't get them when they're born. We get them somewhat later, and if they seem to be skittish, we're usually told a story, and the story isn't always factual, or is it full. In Blue's case, we knew that at some point, although we got him when he was 1.5 years old, at some point he had not been fed for a week or two, and when he first came to our house, the most comfortable he was after I put food in his bowl. He would run around the house and try to find a napkin or a towel or any piece of cloth that he could put on top and cover his bowl. When his bowl was covered, then he could lie down, because he knew that there would be food for him at some time in the future. And that was his response, which is not unlike responses of human beings who have been traumatized.
So what happens to those fears? Do they become memories?
Well, memories are different, because when you remember something, you have a choice. You choose to remember it. You don't always remember it exactly the same way. But what happens with trauma is it gets triggered by association, not necessarily an association that you are aware of, so that you can be sitting in a room or outside, or that's true of animals as well, and then they hear a sound or there's a particular scent, and they get a flashback into the trauma, and it acts as if it's happening at that moment in time. so that there's a desperation in the way one responds to it, and one doesn't have a choice about it.
So what can be done to alleviate the distress and trauma?
Well, there are several protocols that have been effective. One of them is cognitive behavior therapy. The one that I use is called EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And what I've done is I've adopted that for work with both dogs and horses. And I find that the most important thing is for the guardian to be able to understand that when there is a psychological trauma, rehabilitation needs to be done for both humans and animals.